On this terribly rainy day, we have one more panelist coming, but I'd like to, first, let me just see if this works. Oh, that didn't work. See if this works. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, now I'm just pushing buttons. Okay, that worked. So on behalf of Everytown, our Moms Demand Action and Protect Minnesota, we're glad to have you here. We really want to thank our panelists, Bob Mogos and Stephanie Keneally. Is it Keneally? Keneally, all right. And Drew Evans from the BCA, and then Dr. Pat Fontaine is on her way. She's stuck on 35W. So she'll be making her way here. We had hoped that we'd be welcoming Gwen Walls as well. She had planned to come tonight, but then something else came up, so she will not be joining us tonight. Before we get started, I want to give a little overview of the problem that we've got going on here. So Minnesota has a gun violence problem. And these statistics are all from Protect Minnesota's analysis of gun deaths that we receive every year from the Minnesota Department of Health. These statistics are from the most recent year that we have data, which is 2017. More than 3 people are shot per day in Minnesota, and more than 1 dies from their injuries. That has gone up even just in the 3 years I've been doing this job. 1,234 Minnesotans were shot in 2017, and 465 died, and that's the biggest number that I know of that we've ever had in a year. Minnesota gun deaths disproportionately take place in rural areas. Very often our rural legislators believe that the problem is, North Minneapolis, right? It's those people in North Minneapolis. They've said that to me. But the reality is a disproportionate number of gun deaths happen in rural areas because we have a disproportionate number of guns in rural areas, and you need a gun in order to have a gun death. In 2017, again, guns killed more Minnesotans than either automobile accidents or opioids. Last year when I used the statistic for 2016, I kept telling everyone that won't be true in 2017, but it was again. So as you can see, we had 358 Minnesotans who died of car accidents, 401 died of opioids, and 465 from guns. Now, we just all celebrated the fact that our legislature passed the hands-free phone law in the car, right? Because we know our roads will be safer, even though very few of you, I think very few of us in this room would ever text while driving. And yet we don't pass laws for those that are responsible, right? We pass laws for those that would make the wrong choice. And so our legislators cared enough about us to pass that law. And we know that some people will still text by driving, but we also know that laws work. So our legislators cared about the car accidents piece. We know our legislators care a lot about the opioids piece. Both parties are working hard to keep people from accessing opioids. Our question for our legislators is, why is it that they seem to value lives lost in car accidents or by opioids more than they're seeming to value lives lost by gun violence? Gun violence is steadily increasing in Minnesota, and it's faster than the national average. And so this happy little thing shows you that in the year 2000, there were 311 total gun deaths. In 2017, there were 465 deaths. You can see the trajectory is upward. Here you can see orange is suicide, blue is homicide, and the little darker thing is everything else. So we have a growing gun violence problem in Minnesota. Ours has increased 50% over this time. Nationally, gun violence or gun deaths increased 38%. Gun violence affects all ages in Minnesota, especially the young. We've all heard a lot about this. We've all heard about suicide in older men, right? But I'm not sure we've all heard about this. This is the number of young people ages 15 to 25 who died by gun violence in 2017. And yes, we know part of that is homicides, but look at suicide. Suicide peaks among Minnesotans ages 15 to 25. They're taking their lives at an unprecedented rate with guns. Then it peaks again a little bit lower between the ages of 60, I think it's 55 and 61 or something like that. So we have 2 big peaks, but we have to remember the fact that the youth are more likely to die of gun violence than any other age span in our state. Nearly 80% of gun deaths in Minnesota are suicides, so anything that's orange is a suicide, the dark orange is male, the light orange is female, anything blue is homicide, the dark blue is male, the light blue is female, and then the other one is just other stuff. So you can see 80% suicides. That's a lot of suicides. It's higher than the national average. National average is about 60% of gun deaths are suicides, but in Minnesota it's 80%. 1 Minnesotan dies by suicide every single day. Every single day, gun suicides increased 65% between the year 2000 and the year 2017 in Minnesota. These are all Minnesota statistics, except for the next one. This is national, because we wanted to show you that why it matters, why gun violence prevention matters when it comes to suicide. So this is in the whole United States. Over 50% of all completed suicides in the United States are completed with a gun, and yet less than 6% of all suicide attempts are with a gun. So more than 50% are completed with a gun, but less than 60% are attempted with a gun. That's because 85% of suicide attempts by a gun result in death, as opposed to less than 5% of all other forms of suicide. So this is the issue. Guns are so much more lethal. That's why relatively few suicides are attempted with guns, and yet more than half are completed with guns, because guns are so much more lethal. This matters because 90% of the people who attempt suicide and survive do not go on to die from suicide. 90%. So 90%, 9 out of 10 people who attempt to take their own lives through suicide, if they survive that attempt, will not die from suicide in the future. If we can get them not to use a gun, we're much, much more likely to save their life for the rest of their lifetime. Very quickly.
With the 85% gun attempts are successful, less than 5 of other means not successful, why does that only add up to 90%?
I have no idea. I'll just tell you the truth. I got that off of, that's a good question. It's, I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you that that this 85 is kind of a compromise between different studies.
Oh.
And the doctor can help me. Some of these say that it's over 90% of gun attempts are successful. Others, the lowest I've seen is 84%. Dr. Pat, can you help on that at all?
I was just going to say, numbers-wise, it's tricky. It looks like it should add to 100,
But
but it's really 85% of a different number.
Right. Oh.
It's 85% of a bigger number, the bar graph that you see, whereas the other one is just a small number. Is a small number
Of a different number.
Yes, of
Okay.
a different number.
Thank you for that, because I don't make up the statistics, I just make them into charts. So I wanted to make sure that was right. So again, only 10% of those who survive one suicide attempt will go on to try to commit suicide again, or die by suicide again. And we hear this all the time from the gun lobby. Oh, if you take away the gun, they'll just kill themselves in some other way. But if we can keep them from dying in that first attempt, if we can keep them from having access to a firearm in that first attempt, it's very likely that then they'll get the help that they need and they will not die by suicide in the future. Okay, so what can we do about gun violence? This is a great way that the Giffords organization helps us to understand the importance of legislation. So every year Giffords grades every state based on how strong their gun laws are and how weak their gun laws are. If you have a lot of strong gun laws, you go up in your grade. If you have a lot of weak gun laws, you go down in your grade. So we've got 7 states that have A's, 4 get B's, 9 get C's, 8 get D's, and 22 get F's right now. Where do you think Minnesota falls?
F.
Nope, we got a C. If they'd managed to pass stand your ground and permitless carry 2 years ago, we would have gone right to F. If we manage to pass our big 2, criminal background checks and red flag, we'll go up. We probably won't go all the way to an A, but we'll be close to it. But right now we're sitting at a C. Now, so that's how strong states' gun laws are. This is the rate of gun death per 100,000 people that live in that state. The rate of gun death. So what you can see really clearly is the states with the strongest gun laws, who get the best grades, have by far the lowest rates of gun death compared to the states that have the weakest gun laws. We are at about 8.2 gun deaths per 100,000, so we're, some of these states are down in the 3s, and some of these states are in the 20s. So it's a huge difference just based on who's got the strongest gun laws. And a lot of the states that get an A, those are big hunting states. Those are states in the Northeast where there's a lot of hunters, even proportionately more hunters than we have, and yet because they have stronger gun laws, they have a lower rate of gun death. So laws that have been proven to be effective at preventing gun suicides and homicides, there's the big 2. These are the ones that over and over and over again, every public health study shows works. One of them is criminal background check or permit to purchase laws, and we're gonna talk about that. And the other is extreme risk protection laws, or what we have been calling red flag laws. So these are our big two this year. These are the ones that we want to push through this year, because these two bills together, if made law, will save more lives than any other bills we could hope to pass right now. That's why we call them our big two. So our criminal background check bill, it's a little confusing because it's actually not a new bill. It's not setting up a new kind of criminal background check. It's expanding our current permit to purchase law that we already have, that we've had for a long time. It expands that to include private sales. So right now, if you want to purchase a pistol or a handgun or a military style assault weapon from a federally licensed dealer, you have to go to law enforcement and get a permit to purchase. They do a background check in that process, and then you take that permit to purchase to a federally licensed dealer. And it's great because the dealer then is protected by the fact that they have a copy of your permit to purchase on file. But if you want to buy a gun without a background check in this state, all you have to do is go to a private seller. That includes handguns and semi-automatic military-style assault weapons. So this law, if passed, would just expand a law we already have and say that anyone who wants to buy a handgun or a semi-automatic military-style assault weapon, which from now on I'm just going to say assault weapon, but please understand I'm saying semi-automatic military style so we don't run into that. If you want to buy that, if this bill were to pass, you would go to law enforcement, you'd get your permit to purchase, which means you'd get a background check, and then you could bring it to the dealer of your choice, to either a federally licensed dealer or to a private seller. It applies only to handguns and military-style assault weapons, not to hunting rifles, not to shotguns. And that's really important in the state of Minnesota because the gun lobby over and over and over is telling us that this is going to keep hunters from being able to get hunting guns or share hunting guns or whatever all else. This expansion only applies to the guns that are already covered by state law. Buyers obtain this permit to purchase from law enforcement. It includes the background check, and then they bring it to anyone they want to. The important point of that is that the records of these permits to purchase will be kept by the seller, not by the state, not by law enforcement. The seller is expected to keep a copy of your ID and a copy of this permit to purchase, and if they do that, it protects them. If the gun is later on found at a crime scene, they can say, hey, this person was eligible, and that's great, but they have to hold on to those papers because there's no state registry created. Yes?
How would you know if you found a gun at a crime scene that it goes back to?
They can trace them, and we'll let Drew answer that if we have time, because he would know more than I do. And then it includes reasonable exemptions for transfers between immediate family members. So if you want your son to be able to have your handgun, you can give an immediate family member one of these guns, either a military-style assault weapon or a handgun. Of course, if you want to give your shotgun to them, that's not covered by this bill at all. That they can just do. But so it includes reasonable exemptions for transfers between immediate family members, law enforcement, educational use. We heard this charming young boy say that if this were to pass, his trap and skeet team would have to stop. Remember that at that hearing? Nothing to do with trap and skeet, nothing whatsoever. First of all, they don't use handguns or military-style assault weapons. And second of all, there's an exemption for that. And then temporary loans for hunting, yes.
I'm sorry, so, if you were between family wanting to trade a military-style assault weapon, that's okay, or not?
Between family, you could, yes, immediate family. It names immediate family. It's not just like she's my second cousin once
Okay,
removed.
so shotguns and hunting rifles, it doesn't matter who it is?
Exactly. It does, this bill does not apply to them at all. That was a huge compromise, by the way, on the part of Protect Minnesota and Moms Demand Action. We are not thrilled with that compromise, and we need to recognize the fact that we've made a compromise because we know that most crimes are committed by handguns, and of course, assault weapons have such a huge capacity to kill a whole bunch of people quickly, very quickly, because
Why do you have the temporary loans for hunting? This really doesn't relate to hunting rifles anyway.
that's to answer those in the gun lobby who say that they go hunting with military-style assault
Oh,
weapons.
seriously?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, they like to blow up those prairie dogs. So, more than 50% of Americans live in the 20-plus states that have passed some kind of criminal background check law. More than 50% of Americans are safer than we are today because their legislators have passed a law like this or a regular criminal background check law. And so it's important that we recognize this. This is not experimental. This is not new and different. This is not going to hold up in court. It is absolutely normal legislation that we should have passed years ago that will not affect a responsible hunter literally in any way. And so we have to know that. But I have to move on because you're asking good questions, but you're not supposed to. You're supposed to ask them later. Minnesota's red flag bill, so it would empower law enforcement, not family members, not disgruntled ex-spouses or neighbors that don't like the fact that your dogs bark, but law enforcement to petition a civil court, not a criminal court, so there's no criminal record, to remove firearms from those who by their behavior, not their diagnosis, show that they are a danger to themselves or others. So these are people who have demonstrated by what they've said, I want to kill myself, or by the threats made against others, or by their behavior, of their violent behavior, that they are unsafe right now to have a firearm. They already own the firearm. Right now in the state of Minnesota, there's no way to get a gun away from someone unless they've already broken the law, possibly hurt someone. So, the way that they would do this, if a family member knows that there's something going on, if a family member is going through a crisis of some sort and they're unsafe, they can contact law enforcement and share the information with law enforcement, and law enforcement can look into it and determine if they believe that there should be a petition. So again, when we hear about this, the ex-wives are going to do this just to punish their ex-husbands. No, law enforcement is not going to put forward fake petitions like that, and you can be legally liable if you do put forward false information in a petition. There's a danger to that for the person. There are two different types of it: emergency orders for up to 2 weeks only, and then orders after a hearing that lasts for 6 to 24 months. So the language in that is based specifically on our current domestic violence protection order law, which has due process. For 2 weeks you can take away in an emergency situation, but then they have to be able to have a hearing in order for the guns to be removed for any period longer than that. When we passed the domestic violence bill, we didn't hear anyone complaining that there wasn't due process. Even though now we're hearing that a lot, and then I know she keeps showing me this 5, she keeps telling me, Nancy, and then the same due process protections are in place as our current domestic law. More than a third of Americans live in the 15-plus states who have now passed red flag laws, including Colorado yesterday. And so that means a third of Americans are safer than we are because their legislators have chosen to make them so. So that is my, I think that's it, yeah, that's my down and dirty, quick introduction to these bills and to the problem in Minnesota. And now I have to stop talking because we have exciting panelists here that are going to talk instead. And so we're going to start with who did we say? Drew Evans. And please introduce you. Oh, we need the microphone. And you all are going to be I'm not even using one, am I? I'm just so dang loud. But here, you guys can turn this on and hold it between the two of you then. All right, Drew. You could hear me, right?
Yeah.
And I'll use the microphone just to make it easy so I'm not yelling. My name is Drew Evans. I'm the superintendent at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And if you're not familiar with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, it's your state criminal investigative agency. So we're stationed throughout the entire state of Minnesota. We work in all 87 counties, and we have 3 large divisions that are really working on behalf of all of you and your law enforcement agencies across Minnesota. We have the Criminal Investigative Division, which is what I came up through. I'm a licensed police officer in the state. I was a homicide investigator for the BCA and a supervisor in our homicide section before I moved into our management team. And I'm also a licensed attorney in the state of Minnesota as well. When that's the section that does most of our violent crime investigation, we're out working on 2 different homicides in the state of Minnesota right now that happened overnight. So we have are very connected to violence that occurs across the state on a very regular basis. We also have your state crime laboratory that does all the analysis of all kinds of forensic evidence, from firearms evidence to DNA to drug testing, etc. And then another area that we do have a connection to a lot of the background check information that we're discussing here today is MNJIS. It's Minnesota Justice Information Systems. The BCA does not approve any firearms purchases, we don't issue permits to carry, but we are involved in the background process that your chiefs and sheriffs across Minnesota are utilizing when they're approving permits to purchase and permits to carry. There's a system called the gun permit background check system. It's a workflow system that is utilized to do that background check information. What I'll say when you look at this, I was close and protect on our community, working, and what I'm often looking for is what we're trying to do in Minnesota for your BCA is look for areas that we can make Minnesota safer. That's what I want to see. I want to see our kids be safer every day. And when you're looking at gun laws, as I think all of you have been engaged, I see you at the Capitol, I'm sitting there with you sometimes as I'm there on a regular basis. Most of reasons, mainly because of the history of the United States and some things that we're looking at. From my perspective, though, that if we can prevent value in doing that. We don't keep a registry. I did see the background checks will continue to go through the BCA. The information that we even keep in our permit tracking system, owns guns in this country, we only collect information on a background check that was done, and then that information is purged within 45 days. So we don't keep that information at the BCA specifically for that reason, because I do understand it. And that's what I think a lot of these are trying to do, is to put pragmatic considerations in place so that we make sure that, again, right people are getting guns that have been vetted, that are doing this. It will absolutely up to 400 million guns in the United States. That's a lot of guns. And so people, when they want to get them, that are going to do harm, will get them. But if we can also put some roadblocks in the way of people that should. I will say with this is somebody just, again, that were domestic related in the state. That's what I did. Or I saw suicides that would occur, put in place that, again, provide the liberty interests, that we're evaluating them, that we have a proper process and oversight from judicial authorities. They save somebody's life in the process. Again, there's a lot of due process. When I look at the bills, you noted there's a lot of I would like to see on some of these issues as well. But I just encouraged by all of you really taking issues that you've seen and working through that advocacy at the Catholic community to look for common sense solutions to protect Minnesota.
Love that last sentence.
All right, hi, my name is Stephanie Knelly, and I am the lead for Moms Demand Action in the South Metro. So I am a teacher, and I also have two small boys, a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I kind of came to this issue, like a lot of you, I have a lot of things that I'm passionate about, and I feel like gun violence is a really prominent intersection for women's rights and social justice and mental health, and kind of learning more about it. A lot of issues that we might be concerned about are kind of complicated. You think about education or healthcare, and this really is simple. Like, it's like the Reverend was saying, it's like 2 bills could like drastically reduce the amount of gun violence. And so that's kind of how I got involved in being a teacher and seeing kind of the trauma that we are putting on children with lockdown drills, and seeing it from that perspective, that there's this whole generation that now is kind of growing up with that lens. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think we can change it. I think that the gun culture and those of us that are against gun violence can come together. That the people that hold hunting deer can see these as reasonable compromises. So I'm kind of an eternal optimist, and this last season when I was door knocking, I really felt that optimism that most Minnesotans are in agreement on this. It's just unfortunate that I feel like it's a small minority that kind of tries to dispel myths into the conversation and fear. And so I'm just really thankful to be a part of this organization that comes from a place of compassion and love and common sense, and hopefully the tides are turning and that these conversations are making a difference and getting through some of the noise. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, family. My wife is back there. Friends and neighbors. My name is Bob Mokas, and I am a gun owner. And I also took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I'd like to introduce you to my sister, Diane. Diane was 10 years older than me. She's the oldest of 7 siblings. I was in the middle of the 7 of us. And being 10 years younger, at a young age, she was the one that I really looked up to and admired. Cindy knows Diane really well. And I can't tell you what a nice person she was. Nobody ever had a bad thing to say about her, and she never said anything bad about anybody else. Diane became the head nurse midwife at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. She actually developed their midwife program. Before she went to work, she'd stop at a church in the Hyde Park area, which she got involved in. And on July 19th, 1986, a gentleman came out, and as she exited her car, put a gun to her temple and pulled the trigger. She was dead instantly. Ironically, 2 days prior to that, I had climbed a mountain by myself. That was in Estes Park, Colorado. And the reason I bring that up is because about 20 years earlier, Diane and I climbed that same mountain by ourselves. It has a profound impact on the family. I can't tell you, the relationships within the family and externally just get torn and turned upside down and messed up. And, you know, to this day, it still is the pain never goes away. So it has a lasting impact. We know what the problem is in this country. It's the vast number of guns we have and the easy access to them, especially by the people who shouldn't have that access. With just over 5% of the world's guns, you would think that the United States would be the safest country on the planet. We're not. Every day, approximately, we know that when a Sandy Hook and a Las Vegas, at Orlando, a Parkland, a Columbine, we know how that tears at the country's conscience. When this happens every single day, 100 times, this was our Sandy Hook. It affected us just as much as 100 times a day. That is the equivalent of almost 4 Sandy Hooks every single day in this country. After Sandy Hook and our government decided to do nothing, I decided I would do something and so got involved with Everytown for gun safety. As a former airline pilot, the thing that brings the most dishonor to my profession is abuse of alcohol. But we have a process in place to handle that. As a gun owner, the one thing that brings the most dishonor is to handle this. We have to go through the legislative process to correct this. There are 2 bills right now working their way through this process. One is the Universal Criminal Background Check, which I believe is HF8, and the other is the Extreme Risk Protection Order, which is HF9. So I urge them to hold a fair and immediate hearing on these bills so we can get through this process and hold them accountable, if need be, for how they vote. As a gun owner, the NRA does not speak for me. As a survivor, there is not a day that goes by that I do not think of Diane, who to me was the loveliest person that I knew. I am dismayed that since 1968, more Americans have died at the hands of a gun in this country than all our wars combined. Firearms are the 2nd leading cause of death for American children and teens, and it is the leading cause of death for Black children and teens. Universal criminal background checks have been states that have passed the extreme risk protection orders. Again, please call upon your House members to hold serious hearings upon these bills as soon as possible. Also, contact Protect Minnesota, Moms Demand Action, to see how you can help. Finally, text the word HONOR to 64433 and learn about Everytown for gun safety. The rest of the world does not live like this, and neither do we. Thank you.
want to start off by saying that it's great to see people who made it out here on this rainy night, bad roads, and to thank Nancy for inviting me to be here. I have never taken part in a conversation like this before. And I have to say that, you know, I've spoken in front of my peers, but this feels unique and kind of vulnerable. I'm a family physician by training and worked for many years as some of you no doubt have family physicians that you see. We're the cradle to grave physicians, you know, who started, you know, taking on the mantle of Dr. Marcus Welby. And, you know, the idealism of being able to care emotional connections. And, you know, I became particularly interested in the maternity care pediatrics, the moms and babies part of family medicine. I've taught, you know, generations, and to think of our midwife as your sister, working hard. It's a little bit like on the labor and delivery suite, and she had family around her for support, and so it was a crowded small room, as you can imagine. But things were going well, and she was pushing, and the baby was and when the mother broke down and broke into the most awful wail, there was confusion, utter confusion, and what happened? The patient's, and he died. Boy, incredible sorrow and also anger. That feeling has been echoed many times since then in myself, but you know, they're grown now. My daughter's a Downs. A lovely woman, wheelchair. She's been paralyzed. Those are my stories, and that's why we've got to make sure this doesn't keep happening. We've got to get out there. It's not just on a personal level. I am also gun violence prevention on a national level, further 8 on the national level association, because we recognize physician organizations got together, like Health Crisis in this country. Yeah, right. So they said someone should tell those self-important doctors to stay in their lane. So yeah. So I'm a family physician, right? I'm in the office. I'm in the hospital. You know, I'm not the doctor in the emergency room who sees the blood, or the surgeon who has to rush someone into the operating room to try to stitch back together what a bullet has blown apart. But you know, it was an emergency room physician who responded to the NRA saying, and I'll edit out the edit it a little. It's not just my lane, it's my highway.
I want to thank the panel. We've been very, very lucky this year. Law enforcement together has really come together on this for us, and then we got a physician at every single one of these events because it is their lane. 4 questions that I am supposed to ask our peoples here, or talked about at hearings a lot. So, because take your questions on it.
No, I got it's on the back.
Thank you. No! Oh, you're right. You keep giving it to me. Can you tell I'm a little dyslexic? Yeah. Question number 1. Yes. It's been a long week.
Sorry, it's live.
Worry that the criminal background check bill will someday confiscate guns. Jump in, folks. Be noisy.
How the onus is kind of on the seller to keep that information. So there is not, when we were at the hearing, and I think this is something, and I know there was some details about how the iPhone and what if and so while that kind of answers that first question, and you probably could answer that a little bit better.
To hold on, right? So can state. Anybody else want to say anything about that, Mr. BCA man, who already kind of answered it? But say it.
Well, there wouldn't be, and really when it comes to the process, they then go through a background check process. That is done through the BCA, that system. That data is stored for 45 days, and then it goes days, is so that they can, the background note, even if they purchased a gun, it's simply that the background check was completed. So there's nothing tied to the state system about the actual purchase of that firearm.
Law that says that the National Instant Background Check System may not be used to create a registry. So not only is it not in this law that they could create a registry, but there's a federal law against it.
Keeping a copy of his permit to purchase?
Well,
Or is it just the one who sells the gun?
the one who sells the gun, so right now in Minnesota, you can be a prohibited purchaser. It's against the law for you to purchase a gun. But if you buy it from a private seller, even though it's an illegal buy, it's a legal sale. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm looking at you, help me with your name again, was it Joe? Okay, Joe, I wanna buy a handgun from her, she can just sell it to me. If I'm a prohibited purchaser, that's an illegal buy. The state has determined that it's illegal for me to purchase a gun, and yet it's a totally legal buyer.
Okay.
It really applies to the seller. Does that make sense? Other questions?
So there is a record of the sale though, correct?
The seller keeps the
Right,
record of the
but
sale.
there is a record, obviously, of a sale of the gun.
So, if a gun is found in a crime scene, and you can step in if I'm saying this wrong, and they trace it to me, the last legal owner, and I say I sold it, right now, if I'm a private seller, it's no problem with that, unless I absolutely knew they were prohibited and the crime happened in a year. I think I got that right, almost right. But if this were to pass, and that gun shows up at a crime scene, and they trace it to the last legal owner, and I can say, no, but I sold that, and look, here's this is proof that they were an eligible buyer, then I cannot be prosecuted. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, and I just would add, so just pragmatically understanding how this works, when, for the ATF, the record of sale that they do keep is from the first, federally licensed firearm dealer. And so we are able to get that information as to a legal purchase that was done through that process.
Illegal, yeah.
So a legal purchase. And so we are often confronted with illegal firearms that have been stolen, that have been reported stolen, that have been sold through a process with no background check. This would, provide additional pieces so that we can see where that last legal sale did occur through that purchase.
Trace it.
Yet that we'd be able to look back and figure out where that was.
So how does that relate to, and maybe you were getting at this, to a concern that to the sale, to the place where they say, okay, give us all your records of all your sales.
The law, background check, then, just keep it on, folks.
Is it on?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think you're
just
good.
talk.
Sorry. I just like to stress the importance of the background check. I'd like a show of hands eventually here, but let's say everybody in this room is on a 747 from New York to Tel Aviv. And before you board the airplane, they made an announcement that 22% of all you people here did not do it.
Well, and who's gonna go through the line?
There's about 22% of people don't go through background checks.
And that number is deceptively low, because now that half of all Americans live in states where they have to do background checks, in those states, it's down to about only 10%. So states like Minnesota, it's higher than that, and the national average is 22%. Does that make sense? Because obviously, once you've passed this law, then many more people are having background checks, so it affects that overall average. All right, I'm gonna push on here. The gun lobby claims that the red flag law lacks adequate due process. Is that true? Jump in, folks. I was gonna say, we're looking at you. so
Yeah, of
Drew.
course. No, I mean, from the perspective of that, it models the, domestic abuse laws, order for protections. We, in that way, there are procedures in place. I mean, you certainly can enter into the ex parte order that would go into effect until that hearing can be had, but that's common with a number of different orders that we have in place that are related to some of our other laws. There is then that court hearing where the burden is to enforcement in the current state of the bill, that they would have to show that that person is an extreme risk to themselves or the public at large, and that's why those weapons are being held. So I do think there's a oftentimes when I'm at the Capitol on unrelated issues, we often talk about judicial intervention or judicial oversight of anything we're doing in law enforcement. And from my perspective, you're really viewing that in this situation where a judge is really gonna be the one making that determination as to whether or not that burden has been met.
Thank you. One thing that was pointed out to me by Giffords, because they wanted it changed in the bill, and it's another compromise, is that the ex parte order, which can last 2 weeks, it's done at the end of 2 weeks. And if they want to keep those firearms longer, they have to get a new order that includes the hearing. So it's not like it's 2 weeks and then whenever you get the hearing, the guy can get his guns back if they haven't already done the hearing and moved to the other. So, and Giffords wanted us to get rid of that. They wanted it to be more streamlined and we could just hold on to guns, but that's not the way this bill is written. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Many hunters are concerned that they won't be able to pass on or lend guns to family members if the criminal background check bill passes. Thoughts on that, folks, on our panel? Come on, Stephanie, jump in.
Well, I think you made it really clear that it does not apply to immediate family members, so that would be spouses, siblings. Is that parents? Children.
Children, right.
Yeah. So if it's immediate family members, they're exempt.
And if they want to go hunting with a shotgun, it doesn't apply at all, or a hunting rifle. And so the big difference there would be that a hunting rifle isn't gonna be able to take a large caliber magazine. And so we don't have to worry so much that these hunting rifles are gonna be the ones that people take in to shoot up a school.
I have a friend, a retired police officer, who's a gun enthusiast, who has his daughter and his grandson living with him, and had expressed to me hopes that he'll be able to pass his AR-15 style sporting gun that he uses for target shooting, basically, I guess, onto his grandson. How would that be affected by this potential?
Our grandchildren,
We're talking-
I don't think, but he could give it to his daughter,
Right.
who could give it to his son,
I suppose.
their immediate family.
Okay.
I don't know if grandchildren are involved. But it is more limited than just anyone who's a
Right.
blood relative, but he'd definitely be able to get that to his grandson so that he can have his military style assault weapon.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did that sound snarky? If passed, will the criminal background check and red flag laws ban any guns in Minnesota? I'm looking at you, Drew.
Any guns that would be banned under either of these laws.
And how many guns could a person buy on one permit?
They'd be able to buy, I mean, there's no limitation in any of these laws on the number of guns that any one individual would be able to purchase. And as you've seen, and I'll say as you go through this, I mean, I have a kid and I understand maybe all of you wouldn't see, I mean, I grew up in Mankato, Cottage Grove, in Lindstrom, Minnesota. I am one that grew up hunting. I hunted after school, I own a number of guns still to this day. And when it looks at this, and I don't, there's a lot of discussion as to what types of guns people should own. From my perspective, I don't look at it really even from that perspective, other than there's some that we, totally different discussion. But in terms of the number of guns people be able to purchase, these laws don't limit that. And I don't think that anybody's necessarily looking to limit that. We're looking to limit and make sure that people shouldn't have guns are the ones that aren't having guns, and I think that's the purpose of your bills that you're forwarding.
All right, questions from the audience. We'll start with you.
If I get a permit to purchase, is it good today and 10 years from now, or is there a certain timeline where I have to reapply?
This bill is 1 month. This bill is 1 month for permit to purchase, but we do expect that that's an area that would be compromisable. Protect Minnesota was hoping that we would keep in long guns and make it more like a year. But instead we had to give up long guns, and so they're keeping it at a month right now. So that means when you got your permit, you could go and buy as many of these guns as you want to for that month, then you would just go back and get another one. We expect that there will be compromise there. Anyone else thoughts on that? Next question. Yes,
Sorry, I have another.
that's fine.
I went to this committee hearing, and I heard a Republican legislator say several times these laws will not stop bad guys from selling guns to bad guys, and so this is why I'm not gonna vote for it, it's ineffectual, it won't do anything. Over and over, he said that.
You can have a comment and then we'll throw it to the.
That argument basically is an argument against any law.
Well, and what do our panelists have to say about that idea?
I agree with him.
I just want to back up, actually grandparents and
There you
grandchildren.
go.
So they'd be able to, and there are exclusions for death of family members as well.
Yes.
Originally, so you're working on it. I would say I think that talking point, I just want to say it's true. I mean, that is true. This law isn't gonna prevent criminals from getting guns in illegal means, but that's why I'm employed. Criminals, but I mean that across all crimes. I mean, criminals, if they followed all of the laws we have in place, I wouldn't have a job, right? And you wouldn't feel the need to have police officers here in Burnsville or any other place we are. That doesn't mean that we don't look at areas that we can still strengthen the law to prevent tragedies from happening. And I think that's what people are trying to do with these types of laws.
I want to say one other thing to that. Criminal background checks work not because they apply to the criminal. They apply to the presumably responsible gun seller. So we know criminals are going to try to get guns illegally. We know that, and they always will. And Drew's absolutely right. In the states that have passed these, they still have about 10% of the guns are coming through illegal means. But it's important to recognize that most Minnesotans will follow the law. So we passed this hands-free bill because most Minnesotans will pay attention to that. Not all, but most. So we have to make that assumption about the private gun sellers as well, when they know that it could matter to them a lot. If they sell a gun without seeing that permit to purchase, they're gonna be much more likely to want to see a permit to purchase. It also helps them, because right now, private sellers, many of them want it to be a background check, but they don't know how to do it. They don't wanna have to bring their guns to a federally licensed dealer who could then just sell it to them themselves. And there's no way for private sellers to access this process. So they're saying to us, make it easy for me to do the right thing. Give me a piece of paper I can look at and take a picture of, and make it so that I know that when I go to bed at night, I didn't sell a gun to someone who's gonna do something destructive with it.
Do we ever have private sellers speak on our behalf? Because I mean, this is for them too. Like, if you don't want to be traced back to a gun that did something wrong, and if it,
We've had a really difficult time getting any gun dealers whom we know support these bills to speak in public, because it could very seriously affect their bottom line. We know, so we get calls from gun dealers a lot, and we know that most of the gun owners totally support these bills. Protect Minnesota went out on the road this summer, and we went all over the state, and we gave out 3,000 gun locks to gun owners. We went to trap and skeet championships, we went to gun shows, we went to county fairs in rural Minnesota, met 3,000 gun owners. Not a single one, or every single one we met, knew at least one person who'd committed suicide with a gun. So actually, hunters are really aware of these problems. And I think it's important to realize that one reason that America has such a gun violence problem now is that we have fewer and fewer hunters every year. Hunters have always had great gun safety. What happened to you, Drew, if you were found pointing a gun at somebody as a kid? You were done hunting, right? And so the problem we have is a lot of people that don't understand guns, that weren't raised in that culture, that we're never gonna point a gun at another person, are now accessing guns. And so we need to, it's the irresponsible people we need to pass laws for. Other questions?
Yeah, I don't understand the concern about registry.
Huh.
I guess I just thought that was.
Without having a constant, talking about the Revolutionary War, it really goes back that far in terms of the original founding of our country, and that the idea of the government tracking who has guns so that there's an ability to confiscate them one day, and so that they have the inability, the original reason that the Second Amendment was placed into the Constitution was that private gun ownership was very difficult. Therefore, it was so difficult to overthrow the government in those times if they were a tyrannical government of some sort. And so keeping that registry with the government having the ability to go and locate who has the guns and then confiscate them is really the significant concern.
So then the whole idea of going through the permit process, there's a record of, again, the seller.
The seller holds it, not the state.
So in terms of fine, I guess that, this is news to me, I guess.
So So there would be no centralized database. That is the significant concern, that they could hand out the list to law enforcement to go and get all of your guns.
But in
in
terms
that
of
format.
then, or a, you know, again,
It's a serial number on all
Yeah.
guns that are manufactured. We were able to get the original point to tracking back where that gun left that original owner's hand, that links shootings and to.
but, so, I just wanna understand, I have record of who I sold that gun to, so it's, okay, so I.
Held records that the ATF were the
Yeah,
record keeping
I
ends.
understand that. And I have a second question, can I ask it? Okay. The statistic of the A-rated states, what percentage of that is suicide? And, I mean, I'm just curious, how that percentage
I don't know that off the
changes.
top of my head. I know the national average is about 60% of all gun deaths are suicides. In states like Minnesota, where we have more hunters and less urban crime, we have a higher percentage of suicides. In other states where they have more urban crime, they're gonna have a lower percentage of suicides. Does that make sense? But we do know that these two bills affect both the rates of suicide and homicide. And I'm looking at you,
Okay.
Stephanie, because I bet off the top of your head, you're gonna tell us that in states that have passed criminal background check bills, the percentage of decrease for these various things. She's not. It's about 48%. There's about a 48% decrease in all kinds of gun deaths
Okay.
in the states that have passed
Thank you.
criminal background
That's what I
checks.
wanted to know.
We're gonna go Hugh and then you. I'll remember you, I promise.
Would counterfeit permits be a liability for sellers presented by buyers?
I'm looking at you, Drew. I'm so glad you're here tonight.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it could be an issue, right? But this was part of, and again, this is the policy work that all of you are working on. And in order to ensure that there is no centralized database that people have concern about, that's a possibility. However, you're acting in good faith as the person in that transaction, and I don't see a way, from law enforcement, unless we were able to show that you knowingly took a invalid permit, which could happen, but in most instances, people are going to be acting in good faith, obviously, and we can't hold them accountable for that.
And I imagine that they'll all have to look very much the same, the way our current permit to purchases do. And I imagine they'll include the signature of whatever law enforcement person did it, so that if it was a counterfeit, the seller would be protected, and they'd be able to know that the problem was the buyer.
And in that vein, I mean, you certainly are gonna know who issued the permit, so if you ever were concerned about that, you'd be able to contact that law enforcement agency, and they would be able to verify that they issued that permit.
I just wanted to interject that there are many historians who say that the primary purpose of the Second Amendment was not to allow citizens a provision by which they can overthrow a government or prevent an overthrow of a government, but what they were concerned about was that they didn't have a standing army, and they were concerned about foreign attack, and so that's why they have the word militias in there, so they can call up these citizen groups. So, and I just think that needs to be said, because the other point of view is what carries the day with the gun rights people.
Yeah, and I've seen both the historical, and it's actually really fascinating to look at the history. The challenge that you have in this is that the Supreme Court has definitely weighed in and say that there is an absolute right to gun ownership. I shouldn't say that's the wrong term. There is a right to gun ownership by individuals in this country with appropriate restrictions that can be legislated.
I spoke to a professor of the Constitution, and he said that the Second Amendment is like an ink blot when you put it on paper and you open it up. Everybody can see in there a little bit something a little bit different. The North saw it as a way to protect themselves from a tyrannical government. He said the South saw it. My issue is, why does the NRA control the narrative? I believe we need to take that narrative back. We are not free because we have the Second Amendment. We have the
That is wonderful. I'm so glad you brought that up. And I just want to give the warning that I always give. We cannot get ourselves in the rabbit hole of fighting about the Second Amendment. That is a cul-de-sac to nowhere, and the NRA knows it. They want us to argue about the Second Amendment, because then we're not looking at the law the way it stands today and saying, according to the Heller decision, it is not an absolute right. It's a constitutional right to own a gun, but as Antonin Scalia wrote, the right protected by the Second Amendment, like all rights, is not unlimited. It's not unlimited. And so I think that the historical question of why we have a Second Amendment is fascinating, but it often gets in the way of our work. And we can't give the narrative to the NRA to say it's the right that can't be infringed. I can't wear a burqa in my driver's license photo in Minnesota because of public safety, even though we have a First Amendment right to religious freedom. I have to show my face. And so we curtail every constitutional right we have for the purpose of public safety. So let's have those fascinating discussions, but let's not waste time allowing us to get off track on them. Any other questions? Oh, we got two. Him, then you.
Let's assume for the moment that we're not going to get what we want in this legislative session.
Could happen.
What do we do next?
We keep fighting. We vote them out, thank you. But we have a biennium system here. And we're in the first year of the biennium. And right now, the Senate has not allowed any votes on these bills yet at all. Thank you, Stephanie. Let's give Stephanie a hand. Thank you. And because there haven't been any votes that have been voted down, this bill will still be alive in the Senate next year. So if it doesn't happen this year, we just pick up right where we are. We are not wasting any time here tonight if this doesn't get passed, because now we have more people who know what they want to talk to their legislators about. And next year, we're that much closer to the 2020 election. The reason that we're in Burnsville right now is because Senator Hall is vulnerable on this. And so I'm gonna, we'll get back to that. But so what we have to do is keep applying pressure to those suburban Republicans and help them to remember that Hunter Cantrell got elected this last fall, right? That was a flip. That same flip could happen for Senator Hall, who did not choose to come here tonight. And so we are gonna just keep pushing. Next question.
I'm a mom, as you can tell, a new one, that's why I'm asking so many questions, but what is the history of Protect Minnesota?
So Protect Minnesota is the only independent state-based gun violence prevention organization. So MOMS is part of Everytown for Gun Safety National. We are the state-based group. We've been around since 1991. Since 1991, we have treated gun violence as a public health problem with public health solutions, as Dr. Pat was saying. We are a little bit more nimble on the ground because we make all of our decisions here in Minnesota, but we lack the amazing organization that you all have because you've got a national organization helping to organize. Moms organize more by neighborhood. We organize by affinity groups. So we have the Interfaith Alliance for Gun Safety, which Pat has been a part of. We have the Healthcare Coalition for Gun Safety, which Pat should be a part of. We have Minnesotans Out for Gun Safety, which is a gay and lesbian allies group. We have Coalition for Gun-Free Schools, through which we have Students Protect Minnesota, and we have Safe Communities Partnership, which is how we work in communities of color that are most impacted by gun violence. So we kind of try to go grass tops. We worked for 3 years to get the MMA. Thanks Jesus, we have. Sorry, thanks universe, we have. And moms are on the ground, kind of doing the neighborhood door knocking much better than we can because we're more diffuse. Does that make sense? And that's why together we make such a great team. And so we are really proud and happy always to work with the moms. I do feel like that since he put the text thing out there, you can text orange to 474747 to join Protect Minnesota. Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, is there an accepted short term that's term for who we are as red shirts, orange shirts, or no one wants to be an anti. That's why you have pro-life and pro-choice. So what's the short-term name of people who are pro-gun safety, but makes you sound like a hunter? Is there one?
Yeah, well, gun violence prevention is what we use. So we're the GVP coalition. However, I think we need to thank our students because students have started just without any shame at all saying gun control. And when I started this 3 years ago, I read everything from moms, never say gun control, never, Americans don't want to be controlled. But the reality is that the press will never not call us gun control, ever. And so I think we just have to claim that name. We have to say, yes, what we're really for is gun violence prevention, and some of that comes through passing laws that are going to control access to guns. We hear the gun lobby all the time say, oh, the problem's not the gun, the problem's the shooter, right? So let's do what we have to do to make sure the wrong shooters the wrong people can't have guns. But no, we don't have a happy little name. We have talked about making shirts that are half Protect Minnesota and half Moms.
Yeah.
Moms won't, National every town probably won't let us do that, but we've thought about doing it just for fun, because so many of you are members of both, and we love that, and I think they feel a little different as groups, don't we? I think so. Hopefully we all feel good, but we tend to, we're really pushing public health seriously, and that's where we are all the time. We tend not to do the survivor work because Moms is already doing that. Every town's already doing that. We try not to step on toes, pretty much. All right, other questions? Yes?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. Something that has absolutely stuck in my mind since I heard it from someone a couple years ago, that in the metro, there were schools in a certain district, maybe others, that were teaching kids, kindergarten, elementary kids, on the active shooter drills, you do the zigzag run. And I cannot get that out of my head. The other thing is, I just spoke to my daughter-in-law this morning in Littleton, Colorado.
Oh,
And
the
my
lockdowns today.
My grandsons are 3 and 5, and yesterday she took them to the park, and there was another mom there and kids in the park, very nearby, they walked. And this was before they heard what was happening, and all of a sudden, kids are just having a great time, and all of a sudden there's multiple helicopters just, but it's just,
And
you never know.
That young woman committed suicide, or
Yeah.
took her life today. But 500,000 students and families in Denver were affected.
I saw Shannon Watts on the news tonight, and her children, some of the children in lockdown.
We have to think about that. We have to think about the fact that my kids are like Pat's, they're grown up, so that they missed this. But there's a generation of kids now that had to practice being shot at regularly because Americans won't control and pass sensible gun laws. And if you think about that, we're asking children to practice what would be the most horrible thing that they can imagine and do it on a regular basis. I honestly think someday we will have to pay for the way we've treated our kids.
I think we already are. And I will
Yes.
add on to that there is an emerging science and body of evidence for what we saw on kids. And I mean, there are many examples, but this is just not the kind of society constructive adults that aren't at risk for committing suicide.
Absolutely. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Just a quick observation, it seems like even if you call as the seller to verify the authenticity of the permit to find out that it's false, doesn't mean you didn't conspire with the buyer.
There will
Just-
always be
just an
people that break the
observation.
law.
Yeah.
There will always be people that break
Opponents
the
to
law.
the law may
That,
theorize that way to knock it down.
there will, in every law we pass, there will always be people who break it, but most won't. And if nothing else, because they don't want to risk getting caught, because there is punishment then enacted. So, yes.
I had a question about private seller, the licensed dealer. Where does a private seller have to become a licensed dealer to sell guns?
They don't have to. To be if you want to sell out of a store,
Yeah, well, you do even as a private individual. I'm not an expert on federal firearms law. There is a volume and a number of guns that you're buying, insuring, selling. I know of some individuals that do this. There's very specific federal regulations, not at the state level when it comes to this.
but I had a private seller in a congregation of mine, and he used to tell me that he would never have been a licensed dealer because he would have had all these extra responsibilities and had to pay more money, and it wouldn't have affected his sales at all. So it's a pretty big window.
And a lot of that is private sellers that falls under gun collectors, right?
Yeah, it can be both. Just as an example, my father-in-law for a while was federally as an individual, but he was regularly trading and selling guns on a monthly, if not weekly basis when he was doing it. Many of them were collectibles with what he was doing, but they were functional guns, and so when you're in that position, you do need to have that if you're doing it. Again, there are a lot of regulations. That's why most people do not do that. They're subject to inspection by the ATF, all kinds of different pieces that go along with that very extensive background process, etc.
And right now, we're privileging those that don't become licensed because they don't have to do a background check. So we're choosing to sort of privilege the ones that are doing it the least safe way. Any other questions? You guys have been amazing. Please, let's thank our panel. And then, here's the deal. I want you to take a picture of this. These are the Senate District 56 legislators. Now, I can tell you that Hunter Cantrell and Alice Mann, you need to contact them immediately and thank them, thank them, thank them. Part of our strategy this year, and the reason we've gotten as far as we've gotten, is that we've all made compromises, and a big compromise is that we were going to talk about 2 bills. Last year, Protect Minnesota was pushing 5 bills, some that are really important, but we said, no, we're going to push these 2 bills, everybody's going to push these 2 bills, and this meant that all these people that were newly elected, like Hunter Cantrell, because of his support of gun violence prevention, are limited in the number of bills that they can put forward, right? They are following this discipline. We haven't had a whole bunch of extra bills put forward, and we don't want to, because if there's an easy bill to pass, then it would allow legislators to say, I support gun violence prevention, even though they don't support the bills that are really gonna matter, right? So you need to contact these people and thank them for sticking with the program, thank them for all of the work that they've done, and because we don't say thank you enough, and we don't recognize the fact that these people were elected to get this done, and they want to have their names on bills, and you know, they can't all have their names on these bills, so thank them. But most importantly, we need you to contact Senator Hall, who we had hoped would come here tonight. Make sure that he understands your deep disappointment that he did not come tonight. Make sure that your friends and your neighbors that support this contact him directly and say, we are so disappointed that you weren't here tonight. We expect that you're going to vote to save lives in Minnesota. And he should be hearing from you literally weekly. Weekly, he should be hearing from you. Don't get all shy. Oh, I just contacted him. If you are nervous about talking to somebody on the phone, do what I do. Call after the office hours are closed. Leave a message, then you never have to talk to a human being, and they still count it. But we know that the gun lobby is using robocalls right now. We know they're using these robo-emails, and so they're getting many, many, many more emails and calls from the gun side than from our side. And so we have to step up, and you need to hold him responsible because you made the time to come tonight. These people made the time to come tonight, and your senator didn't. Oh my goodness, all the hands, yes.
Is there a place that I could go online to get the slides that you had prepared? Because I think having that very top of mind and being able to utilize that kind of research data in conversation and as evidence for why, I think that's whatever is important.
So if you go to protectminnesota.org, under resources, we have what we call gun facts. And all those facts are in there. There's many more, but they're all topical.
Okay.
I don't usually put out slides because what happened, everything out, and now I don't anymore. They're all trademarked. But all of this material is in that gun facts.
We'll also
And
have the
lots.
video of this out
Okay.
too, so you can
okay.
watch it and.
Good.
Any other questions?
I was just gonna say that, Dan Hall will have a challenger in 2020.
And you should have, the moms are that now to Senator Hall, because he rushed to get these during the legislative session, or their constituents. So,
I've always been a little worried about is the whole
Right
next year or
now.
whatever, so I don't wanna rely on that, and I still wanna.
now, Dan Hall is probably him as well, because it does turn into a numbers game. Even if they know it's robocalling, they still fall back. You need to light a fire under him, and you need to say, you're my senator, and I expect you to protect my children, protect my family, protect.
Is that real human beings that get
Some,
NRA members at home?
and there are a lot of email services that make it look like it does give them something to hide behind. They can say, my calls are, thanks so much.